So we're doing a fairy toadstool house today because instead of waiting for the new expansion like a normal person, I decided I would do it on hard mode without the new items. So if you're interested in how I made this faux tree stump staircase, some alcove beds and an indoor pond with a fairy wing garden, stick around and I'll show you. So we're in Henford upon Bagley today, and I always say that wrong, and I always say upon. And that might be the reason why I always just imagine Henford on Bagley, and I imagine them, Henford and Bagley, as two English country farmers that are in a relationship where Henford is all clingy, and poor Bagley is just like trying to drive a tractor and get on with his day. You know what? I think that makes this town a bit more endearing, and that's why I quite like it. So here we are on this lovely lot, nestled in some kind of like meadow or something. I picked this one because it's just surrounded by trees. And it looked really naturey, and I'm sure that maybe I will move this lot when the new one comes out, because the new world presumably will be even more naturey by this one. You would assume so, with it being called Enchanted by Nature. But it's sort of become normal, isn't it? Fairies or other like magical woodland creatures just live in these giant mushrooms. And I was thinking a little bit about that while I was building this and placing all of these ivy pieces around, which are CC. They are like a 5-pack. From the estate set by Felix. They're really good. I use them they're pretty much the only ivy I use in this build. But I was thinking while I was making this build, why exactly would a fairy live inside what is essentially the reproductive organ of a fungus? So that was a question I was asking myself. So I've decided that there is some kind of symbiotic relationship between fairies and fungus, and the fairy essentially somehow rouses the fungus into a state of permanent excitement so that it's constantly releasing spores, which is beneficial to the fungal reproductive cycle. And in response, and this is how it's this symbiotic relationship, the fairy benefits from then living inside the constantly sprouted mushroom. And I just think that makes a lot of biological sense. And that's how I made it make sense as to why a fairy would live in a mushroom, which was completely unnecessary, and no one needed that explanation, but I did. So that's why I came up with it. But one thing that I wanted to do in this build was an element of wings somehow, fairy wings. And I had this idea, and I've been dabbling a bit more in terrain painting recently, in actually painting different shapes and things. I used to love digital painting. I haven't done it in a really long time, and I think that's what's been coming out, is that I'm trying to paint in Photoshop in The Sims. But I wanted to do these wings. I thought, wouldn't it be nice if we had a wing garden where you view this from above and it just looks like a big fairy wing? It just felt magical. It was fun. It was cute. It's a little bit Disney inspired, this build as well. It's something very much that you would find in a Disney movie about magical creatures or something. So I just wanted to do a fairy wing. So I looked at a few pictures online, and it's just a very basic shape of the one that I sort of thought would fit best. And I haven't painted in quite a long time, so my initial shapes were not the best. There's quite a bit of erasing going on here. But essentially these are just paths, and I'm going to paint through the sort of, what would you call them, the veins of the wings? I guess they're almost a little bit like butterfly wings as well, but essentially fairy wings are butterfly wings, aren't they? And so yeah, painting these veins on. And then to really make these pop, I'm going to turn them into a whole garden. So we're using these grass pieces. There's a few of these. This initial one that I used, I do swap, because after placing a couple of them down in a couple of sections, I did decide that it actually just looked a bit too much I don't know, they look like they're made of silicone or something. So I do swap to this different one that has some flowers in it, and it's a lot more fluffy. I just preferred the texture of it. But I'm just essentially rotating these, going around the outline of what I've already drawn on the floor. And it's mostly the square pieces, the sort of sharp triangular one to get those sharp edges, and a couple of times I use the curved ones to get the more sort of tight curve that I'm looking for that I couldn't do with the other ones. But yeah, this is just placing the same item over and over again. If you are new here, that I do that quite often. And if you're not new here, welcome back. We're placing another item over and over again. It is a staple of what I do. I am somewhat of a connoisseur of placing the same item over and over again, normally to make these sort of custom shapes. But right now we've sort of outlined them all. I did do a little jump cut there, so you didn't have to watch all of it. And I wanted to make this what is essentially a custom little fence to go around. Now this archway, this wooden archway, is another CC piece. It's from Pierre Sim's cold brew set. I don't like cold brew, but I do like a cold brew set. So that's why we're using this one. What am I saying? I don't know. I'm a bit delirious. Anyway, I picked out some windows. There's only 3 windows that I'm actually going to use in this build. Because most of this is going to be ivy. I just wanted this to be a lot of ivy. So I know that you're looking at this and you're like, wow, this already kind of has quite a lot of ivy on it. Well, little do you know, we're going to add a lot more. But for now, we're just going to have these windows, these rounded ones, because I thought that looked more like fantasy-like with the rounded tops to them rather than square ones. And here's the ivy. Here, I told you, I wasn't lying, we're not finished. And I did consider cutting out this bit where I'm just doing a bunch of ivy, but then some of you recently have also said that you like watching me place plants, so now I'm just very confused about what I should do regarding all of the plants that I place in my builds. So I've sort of compromised and I've sped this up to a really, really high speed. So you can watch what I'm doing, but it's not going to last 10,000 years either, which I think is a good compromise. But again, it's just these same 5 pieces that are from the same set, sized up and down, and they've got a few different colour swatches as well, which is what I like about them. So I can sort of create a gradient where they're a bit more on the bluer green side at the base, and then as we go up, I've made them a bit more of the yellow green, which is sort of how plants grow. The newer leaves tend to be a bit more like yellowy. But I'm going to place some gourd and some actual flowers in rather than just grass because it needed some colour. And as I say colour, I realised they're all white, aren't they? So that was a lie. This is tone, really, is what I meant, not colour. And I'm using this one. This really, normally I hate this one, this flower, because the green's too green. But if I size it down and hide it here, I quite liked it. It had this sort of meadow effect. Something's telling me it's from the Island Living expansion, but that could be an absolute lie, so don't listen to me. Using those, and I'm also going to use some, it's not foxglove, it's another one. It's from that garden set. I don't know the names of things. This one here, yeah. It's a flower, isn't it? It's just a nice flower. I only know indoor plants, I don't know outdoor plants. Like, I can't be good at everything plant related. And then these ones here are another one by Felix, which also might be from the estate set, I'm not quite sure. These sort of fluffy round ones. I want to say hydrangea. That could just be a random flower that's come into my head and has absolutely nothing to do with this bush. But that's what I'm going to say that this one is. It's a hydrangea, and if it's not, well, it's not my fault. I don't know. I can't do garden things. What do you expect? Another Felix thing are these hedges here. But I'm just going to neaten up this wing and border it off a bit. I really wanted it to be quite a deliberate looking garden. I could have done 2 things here, and the rest of the build I have made quite wild, but I did want the garden to be quite pristine, fairy wing. I wanted that combination, so it's a lot more neat than the rest of the build is going to be. But these hedges are good as well because they're sort of modular as well. They come with a few pieces. You can see there's like a column piece as well. But now we're going to move on to the roof, which I think ended up looking like a flower hat. So that's what I'm calling it. And this is going to be a lot more wild. But I'm going to use these, what are these? These windows, I guess. Which I always think are a bit that, I don't know, I can never normally make these look nice in a build. And even in this one, I'm having to sort of cover up because they don't connect to the roof properly. So I tend to not really use these kind of things in builds. But in this one, it fit because it's very sort of whimsical and magical. But I'm going to cover these up with a few different plants that I've selected. We're going to have some like grass, some wild grass growing on the roof here. I couldn't really decide while I was building this if the concept is that this is just a house that is built in the shape of a mushroom or whether the house is actually a mushroom. But regardless, it does have things growing on the top. So maybe that is also part of this symbiotic relationship that I've completely made up and was totally unnecessary for an explanation for this build. But here I have a little time lapse of me placing the plants because again, compromise. And I'm going to just put some shutters here, which again are another CC thing. And I have a lot of, I have CC. I do have CC. I like to use CC. I'm sorry, this is not a base game build, but it's generally these build items that the game lacks is what I dabble in with CC rather than like clothing sets or furniture sets, although there are a few pieces that I will use that are CC furniture. It's normally the bigger pieces that are more modular. But we move inside and this is currently 3 floors. I do decide later that it was a bit too much for me to do 3 floors just because of how detailed I sort of tried to make this build, and I was coming up with all sorts of different sections that I almost, well, I won't lie, I sort of ran out of ideas for the top floor. So it's just gonna be 2 floors, but I had this idea that if a fairy lives here and fairies have wings, that they actually aren't really gonna need a staircase. So the concept is that it's actually hollow in the middle, and the fairy just flies up and down the middle to get to the different floors of this. Now, I know that like logically that doesn't make sense in Sims because the Sims can't fly, so I am going to put some staircases in. Sorry, that's a lie, they're ladders. But I'm going to hide them a bit later on. And this does all function in the end because I did playtest it. However, there will be some changes as we go through that I do make before the end of the video, because one of them is that the Sims can't walk on these grass pieces, which I was building this and I was absolutely sure that Sims could walk on these grass tile things, because like why wouldn't they be able to? They're only like 1 inch tall. But no, apparently they can't, so some of the grass will change by the end. I had to do a few modifications. But one thing I'd seen coming in this pack that we're going to sort of do now, which currently doesn't work because the expansion hasn't come out, but I'd seen in the expansion trailer that the Sims can just like bathe themselves in a pond. So although there's no shower in this right now, and it's not going to work right now, when the expansion comes out, the Sims should be able to just bathe in this pond is my logic, and I hope it works like that, and it doesn't have to be a certain size pond or something, because this is obviously very shallow. But my theory here is that this doesn't need a bathroom. So we're not going to do a bathroom. We've just got this pond bit in the corner here that hopefully a Sim will eventually be able to bathe in. But I really wanted to decorate this and make it very sort of whimsical and watery and waterfally. And I couldn't decide whether it was going to be like magic, just water magically appearing out of these waterfalls. Or again, this is I go too deep into it, where I'm like, where's the logic here? Where's the water coming from? So I was sat thinking about this while doing this, and I added a little bit of ivy before I came to the conclusion that I would actually create a logical way for the water to get into the waterfall. So we're going to add some pipes, and I'm not sure whether I like them or not at the end of this, but we've got this little stone wall piece. I was thinking a little bit runic. There was something a little bit runic about it. Runic and fairies. And I don't know if that's a thing, but for me it is. It's like an aesthetic where there's like fantasy runic. There's runes in fantasy, yeah, because they do like runic magic, don't they? So that totally works, it's fine. And then I'm filling up these, what I've decided are runic pillars, or whatever they are, even though they don't actually look runic now that I'm looking at them. But I'm filling them up with ivy. And basically, the explanation for this wall section that we're doing right now is that I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm making it all up as I go along. And at the end of it, there will be a vibe. And here you can see the colours change. And I found the vibe with a little bit of a transition. And we're just going to use these wall pieces, which again are by Felix, and they are also they're the Soho brick set, to sort of cement this combination of brick and nature into whatever the hell I decided this corner thing is. But now we're going to look, and you can see there's a problem here, is when you look up, this section in the middle, the edge sort of looks a bit stupid. So I'm going to try and amend that by using these, the cottage cheese living set, whatever it is. The roof beams, yes, that's what it is. So I'm just floating these up with the 9 key to trying to line them with that ceiling edge to make it look a bit more natural. But I will do a slight transition here and show you it finished, because that's a bit of a boring thing to watch. And we're just going to pen this section in here with some nice columns to sort of complete that area. And what am I going to do now? The staircase, yes. So I know I told you, and I had decided that the fairy's just going to fly up the middle here. But then I had this idea for a staircase using this live edit, like, wooden stump thing that has mushrooms in it. So I did both. So we have a ladder in here that the Sim is actually going to use, and then we have these 2 pretend methods of transportation that are completely non-functional. And the first one is that the fairy can just fly up the middle, and the second one is when the fairy's just having a really lazy day, she can just go up the staircase. And neither of them work, and I do tend to make these things in my builds, don't I, where it doesn't work, but I've put a lot of effort into making something that looks like it works. And I'm just fighting this game at every opportunity is really what I've discovered while doing all of these builds that I'm slowly accumulating on this channel. But to hide the base of this, which is rather unsightly, as you can see, I'm using these bookcases, which annoyingly clip to the wall. I wish you could just turn that off. Just let me have an option that stops this snapping thing when I don't want them to snap to the one next door, and I don't want it to snap to a wall either. Just give me an option, let me turn that off. Please, Sims people, yeah, thank you. But I amended this by aligning them with this curved wall to actually bring them to where I wanted them at the sort of rotation degree that I wanted them. So that's a little tip that you can do, because you can't rotate these freely when they're just wall items. So now I'm going to use a bookcase on the other side, and this one is a CC bookcase. Again, one of these like modular ones by Felix from the Estate set. No, Chateau set. But I like these ones again, I like them because they're modular. If the game had, well, I'm lying, I also did just use a modular game version one, but you can see how annoying that was to place. Like, so that's why, again, CC things are just so much easier to place if you're doing this modular stuff. The game tries to like give you a helping hand in the most annoying way, where it's like, hey, these modular ones, let me just clip these next to each other without you placing it there. And no, I don't want that. So what we're going to do now, oh yes, this is how I'm going to hide the ladder. And this is a little basement trick, which does work. Currently it doesn't work. The sim can't go on the ladder because there's grass there, which I didn't realise at this point. The sim cannot traverse the grass. They're very finicky. However, this specific thing of hiding the staircase does work, and we're just floating up some ivy from the basement, lighting up the basement, and it makes this nice little curtain. And then we're going to light up this build with some floating candles, and I'm not quite sure why I decided floating candles were the vibe. I just thought, you know what, they're quite magical looking, aren't they? And despite there being absolutely no hint of magic in the rest of this build, we're going to have floating candles. So the fairy presumably, maybe they're just like they're an amateur magical fairy where all they can really do is float candles, and they'll get better. But yes, we have floating candles, and that's how I'm going to light the place up. But we're also going to have a few little insect lights as well, which is the only time I've ever used that item. So I did want to add a toilet, because as far as I'm aware, the new expansion, although you can bathe in the water, I don't know that you can pee in it. So they might need a toilet. But I'm going to cover this up with another basement float, just using one of these stumps. And it's functional, again, completely functional. And I've left a little bit that's clickable. But even if it's not clickable, if you just make your sim like need to pee really bad, they will just autonomously use the toilet. It's functional, it works. A few more of these bug lights, and then we're going to work on a kitchen, a rounded kitchen. And the problem with this is that it then has all these gaps. So I had to do a bit of adjusting to try and minimize the gap. But I end up covering these up with some foliage. Again, there will be as much foliage on the inside of this build as the outside. And initially I started using these modular hedge ones, but they were looking a bit too clean, geometric, rounded. So those will change by the end. And what they're going to change to is actually one of the bushes that you can use as a toilet, because they were a lot more fluffy, but you won't see that until we get to the little cinematic bits at the end. But it essentially stays the same as what I'm doing here, and I'm just again covering this up, making some shapes with the ivy. And I was quite enjoying this build, I will say. Oh, I've placed a little oven here, so yeah, that's that. They can cook. But I was enjoying doing this build to the point where I actually have a few other like mushroom ideas. What if I when the new expansion came out, what if I just made a bunch of little well, not little, this isn't a little build. What if I made a bunch of mushroom houses for different fairies, but they're like differently styled, so we could have like a modern glass mushroom and then like a gothic red mushroom? I don't know. Let me know. Would you watch that? Would you be interested, or would that be too many mushrooms? I don't making a little eating area here. Some of we got the sink, we've got some shelves, and we're going to add a little stool for. I thought about doing a table, but I thought that this would again look better with the way that I've sort of made this build with the different sections that go around the exterior. If we just used a bar here rather than a table. And then we're going to just light this place up a bit more with a few more candles. And I think we've almost finished with the lower level. A few more details, a few more of these wall pieces. Oh yes, and then I added a mirror. Or if you're American, that's mirror. Sorry, I won't mock you again. I found this rounded one, that I've never used before, because I normally don't use these very stylized pieces, but it fit here. So I actually shoved that across and said, you know what, that can make a feature on this other wall section here. So then I just filled this original mirror area in with a typical double, wall height mirror. And then we're just gonna fill in this one with some more decorative ivy, because apparently I never get sick of this ivy. Which, why am I always placing plants? I could use other things, but I don't. I just insist on making everything nature. Well, this is a nature build, so what do you expect? Anyway, we're on the upper floor now, and we're going to make some little alcoves for some beds here, which was an idea that I found on, where was it? Pinterest? I'm not sure. Yeah, it was Pinterest. Some very cozy, like, woodland alcove beds. And originally I started using these as CC pieces again. These, what are they, like headboards? From the Harlux set, I want to say. But I do swap these out because they were looking a bit too... They weren't enough. They weren't stylized enough. There's just like a very fine line of stylized that I like to sit on. And if something's above or below that line, and I can't explain how, I won't use it. But we've had a jump cut here because I had an issue. When it was deleting the upper floor, it just kept deleting all the walls and everything. So I did have to sort of rejig the build a bit here. But as you can see, I've not changed a whole lot. I've just sort of added these chateau bookcases. As I said, I wanted a bit more style, and I've recolored things a little bit, made the wood a bit more dark. But I think that's pretty much all I've done. I've also created this rim in the middle here, which will stop floating at a certain point in the build when I connect it to the walls. But that was just to cover some lines, because I forgot to say that earlier in the build, I had to cover the walls in the middle section that I'd used to create this hollow center, because when I deleted the floor, it was then showing a bunch of roof bits from the outside sort of curved roofs. So to do that, I just used some archways and then sized them down with the tool mod. But it did leave a little rim, which I had to cover with these roof beams. But I've added this canopy area to the beds, which is making it look very nice. Especially when you look from the bottom, you can see that there's like a green canopy. And again, using all of this ivy, and we're gonna make these very tall bookcases, which are gonna get taller. But I wanted a library. Like fantasy makes me think of libraries, but I wanted to do a really, really tall one because the idea is that obviously a fairy can fly, and I just liked the idea of a fairy flying up to the higher levels without needing a ladder or anything. So I got the tallest ones I can possibly find in this chateau set, and I'll fill them all up with books later on before we go to the final result. And I like to think of, maybe these like fairies, these modern Sims fairies, maybe they have like, how we have step apps to track our steps, but maybe they have like a wing beat app, and they have like levels of elevation that they have to target goal each day, and then they don't meet them, and then they just take like fairy Ozempic like everyone else. Oh, we're gonna add a bit more ivy and a few more pillars. And then I wasn't quite sure what to do with this final area up top. I'd sort of done everything that I could think of doing. There's like a library that I've sort of crammed a lot into a small space. Downstairs is the bathroom. There's no need for a proper bathroom, so I was like, what should I do here? So I just made an indoor garden because I like the idea of, fairies sort of cultivating nature inside the nature is how I was going with this. Is basically I'd not had enough nature. Oh, and these swings are also a CC item from the Tiny Travelers set, but I liked the swings. I was loving the aesthetic of that. So I'm going to use these modular planters, and I will fill them with flowers before the end. But they are functional to actually grow vegetables or whatever in them as well. And then I'm extending this grass, which will not remain because the sim could not walk on the grass. I wish I could go back and tell myself, stop, because this doesn't work. The sim is not going to walk on this grass. But no, I was so convinced that Sims could walk on this grass, and I don't know what had convinced me of that, but there we go. Little jump cut here, and I've added a few more of these sort of brick rock pieces to the wall. Again, the thing I was saying looks runic, even though there's actually nothing runic about it. And we'll be finishing off just sort of like adding a bit more detail, adding a bit more ivy, just overgrow the hell out of this place. Oh, and yes, these lattices that I'm adding, I did also change the ladder to a lattice, but you can't see it, so I don't know really why I bothered changing that anyway. But just finishing off here, topping up this wall piece with some grass, and we'll go through and I'll make some changes, clutter this up, and we'll have a look at the final result. So here's the outside, which I've not really changed anything on the outside particularly. I just thought, you know, we'll go and have a nice look at that. Oh, I have added a lot of external foliage though using the tool mod, so it really looks like this is deep in the woods, in the undergrowth. Obviously leaving the front though, because we don't want to block the sight lines too much. And here's the top, the finished little like bonnet hat thing with all of the foliage into the inside, and you can see we got these beams. I've added all of these books, there's flowers. I also added some fireflies to this build, and that I think makes it look a lot more magical. Sunflowers, yeah, filled these with flowers. The sunflowers were giving magic, so that's why I added those ones. I've added some cushions and things, so that cozy nook looks really nice. You can see there's that nice canopy with some like magical looking lights coming down. I did a little bit of colour change, and you can see that those bookcases are dark, lighter now. It was just looking a bit too brown, so I did tweak that a bit. And the floor that has been replaced, where the grass swatches were, I've replaced it with grass tiles upstairs, and I've just used terrain paint downstairs. So all of this, the sim can navigate now while trying to sort of keep the fluffy grass in all the areas that I could. Down here, and I've added some fireflies down here as well. And I also added some of those grass rugs, which I don't tend to use, but really fit this build. It was nice using some things that I don't tend to use. But as we go around here, I'll just show you the sort of finished pond area, and I'll say thank you for watching. Be kind to yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.